So this morning we are in our 9 o'clock Bible study hour. We're going to be studying the life of Christ. If you want to open your Bible to Matthew chapter 26, that's where we'll be this morning. We're continuing this study of the harmony of the gospel accounts that we've been doing now for a few years, and we're going to hopefully wrap everything up by the end of this year. And as you see on the screen there, we are going down through these various events of the life of Christ. And these events can be found in one of the books, sometimes all four of the books. Just depends on the event. As you see where we are on number, according to this list, we're on number 208. We are now going into Wednesday, the Wednesday of the last week of the life of Christ, also known as the Passion of the Christ. And so we've been in Tuesday now for a few weeks studying all that, but now we're going to go into this Wednesday. And Wednesday is basically a day of preparation. We're going to see this theme carried out throughout the chapter over and over, preparations for Jesus' passion. The first thing we're going to see, as mentioned there in this particular list, is religious leaders they're preparing to kill Jesus. And then a little bit later, you're going to see a preparation done by Mary. And then after that, you're going to see preparation being done by Judas. And then all of that culminating into the preparation that's made for partaking of the Passover feast. So all of this is preparing is basically the theme that we're going to see. So let's read chapter 26. We'll read verses 1 through 16. And then we'll break down these verses, each verse by verse, and look at what we can learn from there. Now it came to pass when Jesus had finished all these sayings that he said to his disciples, "You know that after 2 days is the Passover, and the Son of Man will be delivered up to be crucified." Then the chief priests, the scribes, the elders of the people assembled in the palace of the high priest, who is called Caiaphas, and plotted to take Jesus by trickery and kill him. But they said, "Not during the feast, lest there be an uproar among the people." And when Jesus was in Bethany at the house of Simon the leper, a woman came to him having an alabaster flask of very costly fragrant oil, and she poured it on his head as he sat at the table. But when his disciples saw it, they were indignant, saying, "To what purpose is this waste? For this fragrant oil might have been sold for much and given to the poor." And when Jesus was aware of it, he said to them, "Why do you trouble the woman? For she has done a good work for me. For you have the poor with you always, but me you do not always have. For in pouring this fragrant oil on my body, she did it for my burial. Assuredly I say to you, wherever this gospel is preached in the whole world, what this woman has done will also be told as a memorial to her." Then one of the 12, called Judas Iscariot, went to the chief priests and said, "What are you willing to give me if I deliver him to you?" And they counted out him 30 pieces of silver. So from that time he sought opportunity to betray him. All right, so let's look at these first few verses here. And as we mentioned, I think after I said that about preparation, maybe you see that now in this passage. You see all these people kind of making these different preparations, and every single one of them has to do with Jesus. And so it starts out by saying, "And now it came to pass when Jesus had finished all these sayings." This is Matthew's way of giving you a theme marker, not necessarily a time marker. Matthew's not really known for his chronology. He's known more for putting things in themes like good Jewish writers typically do. And so what he's saying here is that's the final discourse. That's the last that I'm going to record of this discourse with Jesus. We're now going to go into these last events of the life of Christ, if I may big time paraphrase right there in that one verse. And so that's what he means by that Jesus had finished all these things, and he said to his disciples, once again we see Jesus predicting his death. Once again Jesus saying, "You know that after 2 days is the Passover, and the Son of Man will be delivered up to be crucified." Now, once again, Jesus, as we said, gives a prediction of now the exact time of his death. He's been saying, "I'm going to go to Jerusalem and the Son of Man is going to be delivered into the hands, and then he's going to be crucified. He gives very specific time, saying 2 days the Son of Man will be delivered up to be crucified. And I thought about that this morning as I was studying. It would be like if I had the powers of Jesus, which I don't, coming up to you and saying, in 2 days they're going to put me in the lethal injection room. I mean, very specific, right? Crucifixion was the preferred method of execution of the Romans, and it was horrible. And they used it to deter crimes and criminals from coming into the city. They would line up crosses on the roads coming into the city. Some of these cities around the Roman Empire, basically as a warning, you're not going to do any messing around in our towns, or this is what's going to happen to you. And so to say that I'm going to be, in 2 days, I'm going to be crucified. I'm going to be delivered up and crucified. It's pretty shocking. And I've often wondered, should we need to put ourselves in the shoes of the disciples. I mean, think about that. We Americans, we typically follow different leaders, right? We have certain leaders that we look up to, that we follow. There may be a leader in a social organization that you're involved in, leaders in the church, leaders in whatever business you're in that we look up to. Could you imagine if that leader constantly was saying, well, I'm going to die real soon. I'm going to die real soon. The day that's coming, and then as you get closer, in a few days, I'm going to die. And you stop and think about that. It's kind of what we call that. We call that a kind of a defeatist attitude, don't we? It's not really a trait that you think about a leader having. Have you ever thought about that? A leader who's constantly saying he's going to die. It's kind of ironic, isn't it? To be teaching that way and saying those sort of things. And so put yourselves in the shoes of the disciples. They've been following Jesus for 3 years. They have given up a lot. They have sacrificed a lot to be his disciples. And he's over and over saying how he's going to die. It must have been really confusing. I'm sure they understood to some degree, but then it's almost, I don't know what they thought, but it's almost to the point it's like, there he goes again, saying it again. It's almost as if they just don't pay attention. Why do I say that? Because what happens? They wind up bickering about who's going to be the greatest and stuff like that. And what is the principal thought of people at that time in regards to the Messiah and the kingdom? What's the principal thought? An earthly kingdom. They're expecting Jesus, if you are the Messiah, and he's done lots of things to prove that he is, if you're the Messiah, then we're going to have this kingdom like what David and Solomon had. We're going to get rid of these Romans, and we're going to go back to the glory days. That's kind of the mindset that they have, right? You understand what's happening? And so for him to say he's going to die is rather strange. All right, so he says in 2 days be delivered up. Remember I said this is Wednesday. Now there's all kinds of little arguments and stuff like that, and all kinds of time elements that people like to look at and study as regards to what do you mean by 2 days? Is that going to be Friday? Is it going to be Thursday? Is it Saturday? And stuff like that. And everybody gets into these different studies of calendars and those sort of things. Well, there's a couple of things that we need to understand whenever we get into, when he starts talking about the preparation for the Passover. If you go ahead and jump down to verse 17 real quick, and we'll come back to these verses that we're looking at. It says, now on the first day of the feast of the unleavened bread, the disciples came to Jesus, saying to him, where do you want us to prepare for you to eat the Passover? This is part of the confusion that people have with trying to figure out their chronology and the dates and things like that. The Passover is one element of a larger feast, and that larger feast is called, as it says here in Matthew, the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Okay, so it's a longer feast. It lasts for 7 days. It's also known as tabernacles, where they come and they set up their booths, their tents, and they stay there. Correct me on this if I'm wrong. Anybody that studies Jewish history and understands the festivals on that, but it's a longer festival. So whenever they're talking about time frames, whenever he says in 2 days, we looking at this being Wednesday, well, that makes sense, right? Because when was he delivered up? On a Friday. And you remember what the Sadducees said, or the Pharisees said? They went to Pilate and they asked to have the body removed because it's an abomination to have a man hanging on a tree on Sabbath, on that Saturday that's going to be part of this Passover. Does that make sense? All right. Everybody's like, don't really care, right? Just keep talking, Troy. All right. So here we see that right after he says this, the first little glimpse that Matthew gives us is the chief priests and the scribes and the elders of the people assembled in the palace of the high priest, who is called Caiaphas. All right. So here we see the preparation by these elders and the chief priests, and their preparation is they want to kill Jesus. Now, wanting to kill Jesus is not a new thing with them. This has been going on now for a while, right? If you will, look with me in John 5. That's back at the beginning of, a little bit more of the beginning of the ministry of Jesus. John 5, verse 18. This is right after Jesus had healed a man to take up his bed and walk. And look in verse 18. Therefore the Jews sought all the more to kill him, because he not only broke the Sabbath, but also said God was his Father, making himself equal with God, which is blasphemy. It is the penalty of death by stoning. And so they're ready to kill him right then. This is 2 years ago. So they've been just waiting for the right moment. But why haven't they acted upon it more so? It wasn't, number one, it wasn't his time. There is a timetable involved, right? God has a time frame. Jesus knows that time frame. It is not his time, so you're not going to go against God's time frame. But then there's another reason why they haven't pounced on Jesus. Because he's rather popular, Joey says, which is exactly right. They feared the crowds. Why did they fear the crowds? Because they knew that if they went in and arrested Jesus and the people got upset, it would cause an uproar, and then what would happen? And you know your history? The Romans would come in, right? They would come in and they would squash this uprising and basically wipe out everybody who is involved in this, and therefore the scribes, the Pharisees, and the Sadducees would lose their precious positions. See what's going on there? Kind of sounds familiar with our own political realm today, doesn't it? So these guys love, that's what Jesus taught, they love all the accolades that they get for being in the position that they're in. Now there's an interesting thing about the position that they're in. Notice what Matthew says. They assembled in the palace of the high priest, who is called Caiaphas. Now, if we read in other parts of the scriptures, which we will as we go through this, there's another one called Annas, right? There's Caiaphas and Annas. Caiaphas was appointed, he is the son-in-law and successor to Annas. And according to the scriptures, who's supposed to be the high priest? It's by generation, right? Somebody comes in, it's usually the son. Like, for example, Aaron's sons carried on the high priesthood, and then their lineage continued to carry it on, and their lineage continuing down, right? Well, not in this case. In this case, Caiaphas was appointed by Gratian. This is the governor of Judea before Pilate. He was appointed in around 18 AD 36, was put in place by the Romans. The Romans came in basically and said, you are going to be the high priest instead of whatever your rules are. It would be no different than, I know this can be a little controversial what I'm fixing to say, but it's kind of the idea. It would be no different than literally, say, China. Say they had control of the United States and come in and say, no, we don't care who you elected as president. This is who we're going to put in as president. You see that? That's what they're doing, because this is the high priest of the Jewish nation, the Jewish economy. He's the one who makes all the rules decisions, and everybody follows. And so that's a big deal that he was appointed. And in this, they're plotting then to kill Jesus. All right. What they didn't count on, as we're going to see in just a moment as we get to the latter part of this passage, is they're trying to figure out how to get Jesus. What they didn't count on or see coming was Judas coming to them and making an offer they couldn't refuse, right? All right, so then, as all that's going on, it's almost as if Matthew says, okay, over in this corner you see, it's like you're watching a movie and you can see the evil Pharisees and Sadducees. I really shouldn't say that, but it's kind of the way a picture is, right? And they're plotting and everything. And then we're going to change scenes, and we go to the house in Bethany. Bethany, remember, is just a couple of miles from Jerusalem. It's real easy to walk to. It's just over Mount of Olives. Okay, so if you're in Jerusalem right here, you go down the Kidron Valley, you go up the Mount of Olives, past the Garden of Gethsemane, and just a little bit further, and here's Bethany right back over here. In fact, you can see Jerusalem from Bethany. And so he goes to the house of Simon the leper, and a woman came to him having an alabaster flask of costly, fragrant oil. All right, then we see that she pours this oil over his head, and then what's the attitude of the disciples? Not good, right? They get upset. They start bickering, basically. Now, there is a question here, by the way, of how this fits in. This is not the first time that we've seen Jesus anointed. This is a little bit different. And so there's questions about where this fits in. You can argue different things, but we're going to go with what Matthew has right here and just continue with the chronology that he has here. So you see the highlight, you see the difference, and I think that's the point of why Matthew puts it in here. You see the difference between the attitude of Mary and the attitude of Judas Iscariot. That's the real contrast. That's why Matthew puts these right beside each other. But before we get to Judas, let's look at a few things that he says. The disciples saw it and they were indignant. Isn't that interesting? Somebody comes in and starts anointing who you're following. This is your leader. Did not Peter confess? Did not Peter say, Lord, you are the Christ. You have the words of life. And Jesus even said, Peter, on this rock I will build my church. I'm sure Peter's not the only one to confess Jesus as the Christ. I'm sure that he expected that of all of his disciples, wouldn't you think? So I find it fascinating that if you believe that, yes, Jesus, you are the Christ, you are the Messiah. That's why we gave up everything. That's why we're following you. Isn't that what Peter said also? Who else shall we go to? You have the words of life. So if you really believe that, then why are you indignant whenever some woman comes in and honors the Messiah? When some woman comes in and gives glory and something to her, wouldn't you be instead, wow, this is wonderful, bravo, or something along those lines? Are you following with me? But they become indignant. Indignant, saying, to what purpose is this waste? For this fragrant oil might have been sold for much and given to the poor. Well, in order to understand really what's going on, let's take a look at some of the other parallel passages, okay? Let's go to Mark 14 real quick and read what we can see there. And let's go ahead and read chapter 14, verses 1 through 11, because this will be a little bit different information than what we have in Matthew. This is why we do this study, this harmony of the gospel accounts, and this study in chronology. After 2 days, it was the Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And the chief priests and scribes sought how they might take him by trickery and put him to death. But they said, not during the feast, lest there be an uproar of the people. And being in Bethany at the house of Simon the leper, as he sat at the table, a woman came having an alabaster flask of very costly oil of spikenard. And she broke the flask and poured it on his head. But there were some who were indignant among themselves and said, why was this fragrant oil wasted? For it might have been sold for more than 300 denarii and given to the poor. And they criticized her sharply. Another fascinating point there. Jesus said, let her alone. Why do you trouble her? For she has done a good work for me. For you have the poor with you always, and wherever you wish you may do them good. But me you do not always have. She has done what she could. She has come before to anoint my body for burial. Surely I say to you, wherever this gospel is preached throughout the whole world, what this woman did will also be spoken as a memorial to her. Then Judas Iscariot, one of the 12, went to the chief priests to betray him to them. So when they heard it, they were glad and promised to give him money. So he sought how he might conveniently betray him. Now let's go to John 12.
You think he got mad?
We're going to talk about that. Why did he get mad? What was going on with Judas Iscariot? Now, John, this is why there's a question about the timing of this, the chronology of this, because look what John says in verse 1, John 12, verse 1. Then 6 days before the Passover, Jesus came to Bethany where Lazarus was, and who was dead, whom he had raised from the dead. There they made him a supper, and Martha served him, but Lazarus was one of those who sat at the table with him. Then Mary took a pound of very costly oil of spikenard, anointed the feet of Jesus, and wiped his feet with her hair. And the house was filled with fragrance of oil. Then one of the disciples, Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, who would betray him, said, why was this fragrant oil not sold for 300 denarii and given to the poor? Then he said, not that he cared for the poor, but because he was a thief and had the money box, and he used to take what was put in it. And Jesus said, let her alone. She has kept this for the day of my burial. For the poor you will always have with you, and me you do not always have. All right, so when you take all those passages and put them together, that's why we do this parallel account, so that you can see all the information. If you're just reading Matthew, you get the idea that you don't have all the information. When you read Mark, you get more information added into this, and then John, even more information. So, again, there's that question about when this took place. Okay, you have these time markers, but either way, there's a lesson that's going to be here from Matthew. So what do we know? We know that they got upset. We know it's very costly. By the way, 300 denarii. Remember what a denarii is? That's 1 day's labor. This is some perfume that cost almost a year's worth of labor. Is there perfume that costs that much nowadays? Yeah? Yes. Wow. That's a lot of money. So you can see now, when you start to imagine the amount of money involved, now we get in a little bit more to Judas Iscariot. Why is Judas so upset about this? Why are the others so upset about it? Let's talk about Mary a little bit more first, and then we'll talk about Judas. All right, so there is a difference. One of them says, talking about pouring it on his head, and the other one is pouring it on his feet. But you see all the other elements there that this has to be the same scenario, the same event. Now, what does she do? I love this, that he says, whenever this gospel is preached, this will serve as a memorial for her. What is the memorial? What's that? Yeah, but what about her? How is it a memorial to her? It's a memorial of what? Of her love, right? Of her faith, of her selflessness. She somehow purchased this perfume, this fragrant oil. And instead of keeping it for herself, she decides to use it on Jesus Christ. Now remember, this is Mary. Don't forget, what happened, what relationship does Mary have with Jesus at this point? Something very, very special and intimate. What has Jesus done for Mary? Raised her brother from the dead. You remember that? And remember, Mary was a little bit upset that Jesus hadn't come back sooner, because if he had have, right, my brother would be alive. And then you see Martha more submissive in that area. Now you see Mary, she fully believes, don't you think? So here the disciples should be saying, wow, what a wonderful thing she's done. Instead they're indignant, whereas she fully believes, she knows this is the Messiah. He's worthy of whatever I have. And so that's the gospel. See what a beautiful, nice light she's being painted in. Can you imagine? For centuries, your name being mentioned. Steve did the most wonderful thing for our Master, for our Lord, for the Messiah. Could you imagine having your name in the gospel mentioned in such a glowing light? See, there's the lesson, because what do we see in contrast to that? We see Judas, who we'll get to just one second. Now, he says, you know, why are you so upset? You have the poor with you always. Where are we in chronology of Matthew? This is chapter 26, right? What did he just talk about in Matthew chapter 25? He says, whenever I was poor, you helped me. Whenever I was hungry, you fed me. When I was thirsty, you gave me drink. When I was in prison, you came to visit me. And they said, what? Lord, when did we see you do with all these things? And he says, when you did it to the least of these, you did it to me. Did he not just preach that? And now here they're getting indignant over this woman doing something nice to Jesus. Not one of the least. You see the comparison there? Wow. Oh, yeah, they wouldn't have forgotten if it was. Well, it's about to be done to them, because here in just a little bit, when we get into the Passover, remember what Jesus does to them? He washes their feet. And that's when I think things start clicking in the old synapses, right? Okay, so you see this basically caring act in contrast to the disciples, especially Judas. But then there's a little subtle thing in there that they're not picking up on. Notice what he says. She did it for my burial. Now, we read over that because that really doesn't make any sense to a lot of us, especially us Americans, because when somebody dies, we call someone, and usually it's a funeral home, and they'll come and they'll take the body, and they'll take care of the body, and they'll take care of everything, and then we show up at the funeral home or at the memorial service and everything's ready. Now, that's not how it works in many parts of the world still today. I don't know about Panama, but I know in Paraguay, when someone dies, within 24 hours they are in the ground, because the body, they don't do anything to the body. They don't embalm it. They don't do anything like that. And so to start putting oils on it and things like that, that's why you see the ladies coming to the tomb 3 days later, because they're going to put more oils and stuff like that and fragrances and because as the body decays, it puts off the odor. Remember, Lord, he's been in the tomb 4 days. When it's talking about Lazarus, there's already an odor. Yeah, so that's why it says she is doing it for my burial. And that just goes right by us because we don't think about oil for burial. And what did he just say before that? He just got through saying, you know that after 2 days is the Passover, the Son of Man will be delivered up to be crucified. In other words, I'm going to die. And then they sit down to dinner, and here comes this woman. She believes what Jesus says. And she symbolically pours this oil on him, which is preparation for his burial. And he says that. He recognizes that. He affirms it. And it just goes right over their head practically, doesn't it? You learning a little bit more about this passage now? You seeing a little bit more in depth what's going on? All right. So she had an opportunity to serve the Lord before he was no longer with them, and she did it. That's the point. He's like, I'm here now. Do it while I'm still here. You're always going to have the poor. We're always going to have that opportunity, so do it now. And so then his own inner circle. Any comments, questions, concerns, complaints? All right. Let's look at Judas now. Judas is the really fascinating part. So we got the preparation. Here we are back in our movie. We got the preparation of the Sadducees, the Pharisees, and the scribes. They're preparing to kill Jesus. Over here, you've got Mary, who has done some preparation for his death. And now you have some more preparation on Judas's part. And this is a lot of conjecture and thinking that goes in with this. But you have Judas Iscariot, one of the 12, Casey preached a lesson a couple of weeks ago about Judas and Peter, and he made the point that I always appreciate preachers and teachers do, is that we need to never forget that Judas was one of the disciples, one of the chosen disciples. Remember, Jesus chose 12 people. A lot of times Judas gets a bad rap as he's just this, loser that wound up in the group. Well, he was chosen by Jesus. He heard the teachings of Jesus. He followed Jesus. We don't know that much about Judas other than what we read in the Scriptures. But we judge everything on him by what happens in these next few verses right here. We need to be careful with that, because any of us could be a Judas at any time if we're not careful. So what do we have? Judas, one of the 12, goes to the Sanhedrin and to the chief priests and says, "What are you willing to give me if I deliver him to you?" We read Luke's account, and we saw there that they counted out silver to him. Here we have 30 pieces of silver. That's, by the way, the price, I've heard it often said, of a slave. That if you wanted to purchase a slave, you could buy one for 30 pieces of silver. This is a fulfillment of prophecy, by the way. It was prophesied that that would happen to Jesus. But why did he do that? Why did Satan do that? What's interesting is that John says that Satan entered Jesus' heart. All right, John states that. Satan entered Judas. Let's read that real quick so I make sure I'm not misquoting. John 13, verse 27. Now, after the piece of bread, Satan entered him. Then Jesus said to him, "What you do, do quickly." All right, so he's described, in fact, Luke says the same thing, Luke 22, verse 3, that Satan entered him. Now, what's going on here? Satan entered into him? So Satan went in and reached into his heart or grabbed his hand or just steered him a certain direction? Is that what's going on here? How do you understand that? Because this is an important aspect of faith and theology. Let me ask you some questions. I see a lot of perplexed looks. So let me ask you some questions. Let's work this out. Number one, is Satan omniscient? No. Why? Because only one is omniscient, right? Who's that? God. Only God is omniscient. Is Satan omnipresent? No, because only one is, and that's God. Is Satan omnipotent? No, because only one does that, and that's God. So if Satan is not omniscient, he's not omnipresent, he's not omnipotent, that means he can't be everywhere, he doesn't have all power, and he doesn't know all things. That's an important concept to understand about Satan. And so Satan is not like God. Jesus clearly could see into the heart. God sees into the heart. Okay? Satan we need to understand, Satan is limited. Revelation chapter 20 and 21. He is limited. He's limited, as we saw in Job chapter 2, right? Job chapter 2 and 3, where God limits his power. But Satan does have influence. He also has allies. And so whenever it says Satan entered Judas, it's no different than whenever the Bible says that God hardened Pharaoh's heart. Don't take out free will. In both cases, whether God hardened your heart or Satan enters in, it's still free will. We understand that God hardens a heart because of the words. And when God says, "This you must do," and you reject that, that's you making that decision. So one could say, well, God hardened his heart because he rejected God's word. Does that make sense? It's not God actually reaching in and hardening the heart. Same way Satan is not reaching in and manipulating things. Instead, what Satan do? Satan leaves little breadcrumbs. All right? And he just leaves. I'm going to leave a trail of breadcrumbs right over to this that you won't be able to resist. What was Judas's weakness? Money. Right on the money there, Joey. Exactly. Judas was weak when it came to money. There was something about money. What do the scriptures tell us? That he kept the purse, right? And he dipped into it often. Often, what was he dipping into it for? What was he buying? What was he? Was he saving up some off to the side or something like that? What was he doing? That's embezzlement, right? Embezzling from Jesus. So, why did he do it? All right, so that's the next question. Satan entered into him is simply a way of saying Satan was able to manipulate things in order for him to fall right into the trap. He sets traps for us. That's why, what does Paul say? That we put on the armor of God so that we might withstand the attacks of the devil. Sometimes it's called the darts, right? Those fiery darts that are thrown at us. It's not like Satan's coming in. He's still got a battle. And James tells us that if we withstand him, he will flee from us. And so you have power. I saw a meme just recently, and it was Satan leaning over and says, "You're not strong enough to withstand the storm." And the guy looks back and says, "Yeah, but at least I didn't lose my fiddle to some hillbilly." Only a few of y'all got that joke, man. Charlie Daniels? All right. A better one is, "My God is stronger."
We all have weaknesses.
Uh-huh.
And evil appeals to our weakness. Every one of us. Yeah, every one of us have weaknesses. One day I said that in front as I was teaching on this, and one guy said in the audience, he said, "I don't have one." And a lady from the other side said, "That's what."
There it is right there.
And he was a little ashamed. We all have weaknesses. And
Amen.
that's where we just need to be conscious of our weaknesses. This was a small thing. He wasn't building a great castle. Judas was small things, see. I believe at the Lord's Supper, he felt bad when Jesus did what he did. He had a little slide on him. It was the small things, I believe, because Judas is small, and that was his weakness.
Yeah.
And
We all have weaknesses. That's right.
weaknesses, and Satan appeals to
He appeals to those.
He doesn't appeal to my strengths.
That's right.
And that's what happened here, and that's
Satan wants you to fail. He wants you to fail, and if he can find your weakness, and that's the thing. Again, he's not omniscient. He doesn't know everything, but he can see the pattern. Oh, I see that Troy likes this. And he starts leaving little breadcrumbs. All right.
Sum it up for James 1.
That's it.
14,
Mm-hmm.
15. It says, "But every man is tempted when he is drawn by his own lust, and enticed, and when lust hath conceived, it bringeth forth sin, and sin bringeth forth death."
Perfect verse. Excellent. That's exactly right. All right, real quick, last few minutes that we have, let's speculate a little bit about Judas. Why did Judas do what he did? We've established, I'm glad that everybody picked up on that. We've established the fact you still have free will. And so Judas made the decision. He could have gotten out of this at any point. Now, this is God's plan that the Messiah would be betrayed, but Judas was a free agent working in that plan. But why? Why did Judas do that? There's been lots of speculation. One of those is that maybe he was jealous. You ever thought about that? A lot of times you see when it comes to embezzlement and stuff like that, there's jealousy involved a lot of times. And then other times, maybe he was disgruntled. I mean, he sat there and complained about what was going on with Mary.
Jealous of Jesus, or jealous that he wasn't like Peter, James, and John, who were the inner three?
Great point. Great point. Jealous of Jesus, or jealous that he wasn't up there in the top echelon with the inner circle. He was impatient. That's been a theory that's thrown out there. It's like, come on, Jesus, you're the Messiah. Let's get this show on the road. Let's get this kingdom in. Why do you keep saying, my time is at hand? Come on, let's do this. He could have been disillusioned. Maybe he's like, you know what, this ain't all that I thought it was going to be. And so he's looking maybe for a way out. Just trying to make a fast buck. He's like, hey, here, I can make some really good change over here. What? Dinero, that's right. What about maybe trying to save himself? Maybe he sees this thing going south. You know, Jesus keeps saying he's going to die. I'm thinking there might be something to this. You remember just before they came, Thomas was saying, and Peter was saying, we have these swords, right? Remember that? And I'm ready to go die with you, Thomas said. All right, maybe Judas is thinking, no, I'm not liking the way this is going. You know, this is not, I need to, because you know the old saying, whenever a war breaks out or whenever there's conflict, you know, which side are you going to land on? You know, the outcome of that's going to matter, whether or not you're a hero or a zero, right? So maybe he's trying to make arrangements for himself to save himself. Either way, it's still free will involved. He could have gotten out at any time. He could have changed this. He obviously felt remorse because it says that. And it says that he felt so much remorse that he wasn't apparently in his right mind and he killed himself. Could Judas have repented of that heinous act and been forgiven? Yes. We forget that, don't we? Could you imagine, have the story been written a little bit differently? Because what did Peter do? Peter did something just as bad as Judas. Really. But we see the other side of the story with Peter. And then we see the other end with Judas. And don't we see that often a lot of times when people do embezzle money? When they do things like we just talked about, where things are so bad that they wind up taking their own life. And that's what we see with Judas. So you see this contrast in these preparations. You see the scribes and Pharisees preparing to kill him. You see Mary preparing his burial because she believes in him. And then you see Judas making preparations to betray him. And so all of this then leads into, we'll pick up on this in 2 weeks, because next week we will not have this class. Next week we're going to have John Warnes from World Video Bible School, who will be here giving a presentation about the materials that they have and all the evangelistic opportunities that are available through World Video Bible School. He'll then also bring our lesson for us at the 10 o'clock hour. And then the following week, I'll be back in the Bible class with this, and we'll pick up in verse 17, and we'll give a lot of detail about the Passover meal. Excuse me, the Passover meal. I was thinking Sabbath, and it's the Passover meal before the Sabbath. All right. Thanks for your attention. We're going to take a break and prepare